Okay, I am Elisa Reis, Professor of Political Sociology at the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro, and I am also Vice President for the International Social Science Council. And at my university, I share a research group on, it's called the Interdisciplinary Network on Inequality Studies. Here I belong to the steering committee, to the scientific committee, and I am also one of the two coordinators of Chapter 1. Look, the whole idea of the project is really something promising. I mean, make an assessment of the big changes in course and projecting them into the future is such a challenge. I hope we can fulfill that challenge, pointing to possible scenarios. And I also dream that knowing the possibilities will help people to choose the best ones. Look, being the first chapter, I think our task is mainly to open the page, sort of introducing many of the themes that will be developed by people in other chapters. So I think our main task is to make an assessment what are the major changes in process and how do we envision them evolving from here on. Listen, I have two main fronts. One of them is exploring the major cultural ideological changes in progress. And here I identify three major changes. One of them is the perceptions, the social perceptions of the interaction between humans and nature. We start in the modern age believing that we have to conquer nature, and now in this sort of second modernity, you may call it, we look for, we have a different perspective. We think of our role as protecting nature rather than conquering it. I think this is such a change in people's perception, because with the first modernity, when we start believing that we have to conquer nature, was born also the idea that development, growth, was something perpetual. That with the combination of reason and technology, we could go on forever growing, being more productive. We still sort of believe it, but we have started to realize that if we conquer nature as we have been doing, we are going to kill the chicken of the golden eggs, because we have to, in order for growth to continue, we have to protect nature, we have to be allies and not conquerors of it in order to establish growth. If that is true, then growth has to be conceived in a different frame of mind. And that is a big cultural change, I think, in our ways of reflecting about our conditions. A second change, which is also of a cultural ideological nature, concerns our perceptions of the organizational resources available to people. In modern age, in the first modernity, usually we sort of state and market as the two major principles to organize society. Now, lately, more and more people start suggesting there is a third organizational resource that does not conflate with state or market, and that is civil society itself, solidarity. So rather than counting just on authority and market interests, now people start to bet on civil society resources to interact with the state and market. So that's a different perception as well. Instead of two major organizational principles, we now conceive of three organizational principles. If you think, for example, of NGOs, they are an indication of what I'm saying, an illustration that people think of forms of organizations which are neither market nor state. Perhaps because I share a network on inequality, I think inequality is one of our major problems. And coupled with that, inequality today is also, does accommodate also the need for recognition of differences. So it's another big change. Instead of thinking of equality and inequality as the two major things, major contradictions, we now see equality as combined with difference, as two things that we should strive for. And that poses so many new problems, because for maybe 2 centuries, people were striving to become equal, to affirm the value of equality. And now we realize that equality must accommodate difference. So this is one of the major problems. There are others, like the problem with our interaction with nature that I was mentioning. That's also a crucial problem. The problem of the precarization of labor. And connected to that, the new patterns of mobility in the world. We are assisting to such a tragedy with people trying desperately to move across continents because they have been displaced by political facts or by sheer poverty, but this is some problem we have to look at. Listen, I think there are 2 kinds of impact. Within the academic community, I think the IPSP will kind of reactivate debates about the future. We all are very busy, we all tend to be confined in our fields of specialization, our preferable methodological networks, and with combining such a large group of scholars who, of course, share different views, I think we will be effective, I hope we will be effective to reactivate debates about future possibilities. And also, I hope we stimulate an enlargement of this self-reflection that social sciences naturally have. But I think our social reflection needs to be really globalized. We still think of, it's difficult not to think of social science without the Western bias. It was born in the West, in this form of science, this form of knowledge. But in order to be really self-reflective, we have to accommodate a much more global view of our condition. Of course, being global also means respecting regional influence and all that, but if we are all regionally based, it's much easier to perceive that our self-reflection has to take into account the self-reflections of our counterparts in other parts of the world. This within the academic community. Now, I also hope we have an impact outside the academic world. In which sense? If we manage to have a panel with a message for the large audience, perhaps we will show them that we are aware of our moral responsibility, or that we have an ethical responsibility as scientists. If we do constructive criticism of the status quo, this fulfills our need for a moral response to the larger society. And I do hope the panel reaches that stage. Social science is a product of social life. Before we emerged as science, we used to be conflated with religion, philosophy, whatever. It was part of the modernity phenomenon to emerge a science of society. And that, as you know, historically gained preeminence in the Western. Of course, there were other regions in the world that were modernizing, but in the equilibrium of political forces, the Western emerged as the forerunner of modernity. As modernity gained proeminence in the Western world, the basic notions of social science emerged in that context. So, I mean, in the context where feudalism was deeply established, to affirm the equality of individuals was an immense advance, progress, of course. But to do that, people concealed differences. They forgot, for example, that everybody was born equal, but women remained subjected for a long time. So, in other contexts, people borrowed those values, or they were imposed upon them in some cases, because the matrix of social science was European. But of course, the reproduction of those values in other contexts have different consequences. So it's only much recent when we start really taking full awareness of the global, that society is global and not national. Then we have to think of equality in a much broader context. Besides, we have to think of really recognizing differences as conditions to equality. Well, maybe I should mention one of my major research themes, which is elite perceptions of poverty and inequality. I have done studies on different countries, how elites think of poverty and inequality, with the idea that what really interests me is to identify under what conditions elites do perceive that poverty has negative externalities, that poverty affects themselves. Using a theoretical model that sees the development of the welfare state as a consequence of this awareness that poverty affects everybody, I try to evaluate if in other contexts other than Europe, this was also true. So I was sharing a project many years ago, studying elite perceptions in Brazil, South Africa, the Philippines, Bangladesh, and Haiti. And we found out that elites have very different perceptions of what are the consequences of poverty for themselves. And that unfortunately, they don't tend to see as their own responsibility to do something to reduce poverty, to reduce inequality. I mean, some national elites are more prone to do something than others, but usually they think the state should do it, and they don't identify themselves with the state. Even when they are state elites, they say, no, I'm just in charge, but I don't have power for it. So now I am repeating this study that I did a long time ago. I'm studying elite perceptions in Brazil, South Africa, and Uruguay. And there are some slight changes. This is still in progress, but I can see that in some cases, elites start perceiving that less poverty may be profitable to them. I mean, in some sense, instead of believing of the trickle-down effects of growth, they start thinking of the trickle-down effects of redistribution. I mean, the enlargement of the consumer class may benefit themselves. And that is a positive development. I hope it goes on. And I hope my research does confirm these first signs, these first findings that I have preached.